Hello, everyone, and we're live again with Angelo, who decided to join us with like very little preparation, but I thank you very much.
Hi, Esha.
How are you doing?
Good, good. It's 11:30 here in Switzerland.
You came back from Venezuela then?
Yeah, I spent 2 months in Venezuela, now Switzerland, and hopefully I'll be back to China because that's where I live. I live in Hong Kong.
Oh yeah, you do. Well, there's a lot to talk about.
Okay.
What I see is that the news 24. I mean, where do we begin? I see a lot of outright lies. I see a lot of so let's start with when did this war begin?
Yes, I think it's important to go back to 2014. In 2014, there was an elected president. His name was Yanukovych, and he was pretty much balanced. He was between the EU and Russia, and he was proposed an agreement by the EU. And he was, and on the other side, he had an agreement with Russia.
Hold on,
And
one quick question. So Ukraine had some IMF loans that they couldn't pay and they needed a bailout, right?
Yes, that was part of it, but it was also a free trade agreement between the EU and between Russia, and they couldn't have both, just because. And Yanukovych, he was given an offer by the EU, and it was unacceptable. It was unacceptable.
What was the EU agreement, if I may ask?
It's a liberalization of your market. I mean, basically, lots of layoff. You have to lower pension funds. It was political and economical suicide. It's those neoliberal, policies, and it was not. They were not given the money they needed. On the other side, the Russians had a similar treaty, agreement, with much better conditions. They were actually putting on the table $15 billion US. So what happened is that the people started coming out in the streets, but they came out in the streets pro EU.
That makes absolutely no sense. If the deal with Russia, like no one is protesting, hey, I want lower pension funds. That makes no sense.
Absolutely no sense. But people, average people that came in the streets, it was more about the idea of the EU. We are going to be part of the EU, but you have to keep in mind that a lot of youngsters in Ukraine, because the economy was so bad, and it is still. I mean,
it's horrible.
It's a wreck. If you compare the economy, just to give you an idea, the economy now and since independence, 30 years, the GDP is much lower than 30 years ago. So Ukraine was much better under the USSR than now. So just going back to 2014, so we don't lose track. So people, they were coming into the street, and the youngsters, what they wanted was the possibility to be able to work in the EU. That was the most important for them, but it was not about the economy of Ukraine. It was, how can I get out of my country and I can work in the EU? Because part of the agreement was also the ability to work in the EU. And keep in mind one thing: when you invite those Ukrainian people to work in the EU, we are talking about much cheaper labor.
everyone's wages are, there's no incentive to have higher wages, so everyone's wages are kind of
Well, this is why we need to look at immigration. A lot of people they have a misconception of immigration. Keep in mind that when we accept immigration, you're accepting pressure on the local wages. Who's winning is the elites. So this is why a lot of people that are saying, well, let's open the door to refugees, to other countries' laborers, and so on. What is going to happen is that they come in and they are willing to work for much lower wages, and also much. They're not picky when it comes to conditions, working conditions.
also because they're not citizens yet, you as a country can deport them for forming a union. So like
Exactly.
they are, the way they create the immigration system is a very precarious situation. Like if in the US, I've actually seen that there was a meat corporation that literally called ICE on the employees once they formed a union. So like the conditions in which they make immigration possible, the first one is via bombing their country, and then the second one is making that status where they can't unionize, they can't actually seek a there are so many things that are like their visa is tied to their job. So when you tie something to their job, they're stuck and they're vulnerable. So you can cram down any of the terms and conditions you want. So it's less about what they're willing as much as how the conditions are set up so that it allows for these to happen.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah. Just to give you an idea, in the last 15 years, Ukraine used to have 55 million people living in Ukraine. Now it's 10 million less,
where
45
where
million
did they
roughly.
go?
An estimate, I mean, really rough estimate. 8 million people, they left to work in the EU, all around the EU, for cheap labor. I don't want to say, I mean, slave labor, basically.
But basically,
And yeah, and you have 2 million people refugees, Russian refugees, because of the last 8 years, the bombing on Russians. We never talk about this, but 2 million Russians, ethnic Russians from Ukraine, they left, and they left to and went to Russia.
yeah, a lot of them were stateless. Actually, there's a big problem with stateless Russians in all of the surrounding proto-fascist states: Estonia, Finland, what else? Lithuania, Latvia. Because the conditions is that like whoever was in whatever border, like each country would respect the minorities, and unfortunately, only Russia's kept their end of the bargain. And yeah,
Yeah, well, it's a mess. The dissolution of the USSR created a big mess, because you find Russians everywhere, pretty much everywhere. Central Asia, Kazakhstan, and so on. I mean,
yeah. I mean, Russia,
absolutely everywhere.
all of them were okay. These countries did not exist before the USSR. They were part of Tsarist Russia. So it's
Yeah.
yeah. So it's like there's no historic. Long story. Okay. So now Ukraine is much worse off. Okay. So then the
Uh,
protests began.
So just go back to the protest. Those people that came out in the street, you had, yeah, I mean, people they had legitimate requests. Keep in mind that those color revolution, or I mean, coup, because this was a coup. They start with legitimate protest. There was a lot of corruption in Ukraine, like ever. It's been always like this. You have oligarchs that run the show. They steal the country, and
But sorry, didn't Ukraine also? Just so you know, the West. Okay, so the USA alone had have 1 million Ukrainian exiles,
yeah.
and
Oh, you have money. You have oligarch. I
no,
mean,
but the exiles, they were what's the right word? They were in World War II. There were two sides. They were on Hitler's side. A lot of them.
yeah, you have that. You have
Yeah,
that
yeah,
too.
yeah. So it's kind of leads up. You'll learn how this is relevant to the problem.
We'll
Okay.
get back to that. Because we'll have to at some point,
Yeah, we'll get
because
back to that. Okay.
it's related to the Azov Battalion and neo-Nazi movement.
Exactly. So
So,
now,
yeah, so
2014.
2014 they came into the street, and so legitimate requests. Very often it starts like this, and then those movements are hijacked. So they were pushing for the EU agreement. And at some point, the situation was boiling. They started to have people dying on the square. You know who started killing them were snipers, Georgian snipers. They were killing.
Hold on 1 second. You're going too fast for Americans.
Yeah.
So on Maidan Square, there was an American Marine named Brian something. I'm trying to, but he was training these people from Georgia, the country. And so they were in. Okay, so let me remember. Go ahead. Sorry, you go too fast.
Well, you had those snipers, and basically the snipers they were actually killing both sides. They were killing protesters and they were killing policemen. So the idea, when you kill people, when you have those protests, how you can turn a protest into a color revolution, to a coup, you need to create martyrs. Once you have martyrs, then you glorify those martyrs. Oh, they fell for us. People start to feeling sad, and then the movements get bigger and bigger.
They became the Maidan one, the Holy 100 or something.
Yeah, the Holy something.
100.
So it got really bad. It was bad. They were battling in the streets. And up to a point where you had Yanukovych, and you had the opposition. They sat around the table, and at the table also you had people from France government. You had from Germany. They came all the way because they needed to find a solution, and they found a solution. Yeah, they found a solution. The solution was to have early elections.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody agreed. The only one that didn't agree were the neo-Nazis. They were part of the protest. They were the most violent, and those ones really hijacked the whole thing. It got so bad that to a point that Yanukovych, he was threatened. They were threatening his life. He was so he had to flee Ukraine, and he first went to Crimea, and then he went to Russia.
He's from the Donbass region, so just so you know.
Yeah. So from then on, you had, the neo-Nazi, Azov battalion. You had several movements. You have a Svoboda. Svoboda, which became a party later on, Right Sector and the Azov battalion. So they are movements.
Fatherland.
Yeah, you got quite a few actually. After even within those Azov battalion, they separate. They split into different. Many battalions, but the Azov battalion is the main one that you find now fighting in Donbass. So you have since 2014, those neo-Nazis, they have this informal power. You have the formal power, the people that you have on the front, but on the back, who do you have? You have those thugs. You have the neo-Nazis and you have the oligarch. Those are the ones that had the real power. So there was a coup, and that's interesting. There was a telephone call between Victoria Nuland just then at that moment, and it was with the U.S. ambassador. And basically, Victor Nuland, she was actually saying, "Well, we shouldn't pick this politician. We should pick this politician. It's better for us." And she just basically said, "Well, fuck the EU." Basically,
Yeah, she literally said those words.
Yeah, because EU is the hostage of the US.
Wait, one more thing. Victoria Nuland is not a neutral source. She is a daughter of a Ukrainian exile. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, and she's so because of those Ukrainian exiles, and Russian exiles, they tend to be, extremely anti-Russians, anti-Russians and anti-Putin, the one that left, it's all those exiles that you find Cuban exiles, they're extremely anti-Cuba, and Venezuelan exiles. It's always that profile, the type of profile. So she actually said that in a conference, I don't know if it was for NED, but it was a conference that she said that the US had invested $5 billion into Ukraine's democracy.
Oh,
But you know,
I have that video actually.
yeah.
Go ahead. Well, we'll show it at the end.
So what does it mean when you spend $5 billion into your democracy?
That sounds like it's not a democracy, because the definition of democracy is the people who live there rule,
Yeah.
not the $5 billion.
Well, you can buy everything, man. It's such a poor country. It's extremely poor. We're talking about GDP of 100 billion US dollar. It's very, very poor. So what you do with that money, you spend you into, I mean, NGOs, protesters. You buy weapons. I mean, you can do so much. Imagine you pay politicians. So it's basically the U.S. has hijacked Ukraine's democracy. So you have, I mean, hundreds of NGOs. And
Hundreds is an understatement. I
oh
really
yeah,
don't
yeah,
know how many.
it's huge. It's huge.
Well, I was looking up this one, just one NGO. It was called the Reanimation Reform Package, which was made up of 72 other NGOs. Okay, so this main NGO was funded by the USAID, and these 72 other NGOs were also funded by the USAID. And then they were like, it's like, there is not a
It's
count. Like
it's
Kazakhstan had
ridiculous.
16,000. I don't know how many there are,
Yeah.
but anything coming out of Ukraine, like I see a lot of like NGO, the US money, you can smell it in many ways.
I'm not. Yeah.
Wait, one thing. The what's his name? Poroshenko, the next president, he created a constitutional commission, and literally an employee of the United States Agency for International Development was on the constitutional commission writing part of the Constitution.
Oh, there's worse than that. There's much, much worse.
Okay, go
You know what they did? You know what
No.
they did? They actually had ministers that overnight they were foreigners. They were from Lithuania, USA, Georgia, Saakashvili. Overnight, he was given a Ukrainian passport, and they were ministers.
They were Shakaveli. Well, basically,
Yeah.
he got like literally he got kicked out of Georgia physically
For corruption, yeah, for
Yeah.
corruption case, he got kicked
and
out of Georgia.
he's the mayor of some city, right?
He was given the title of governor of Odessa.
Oh my god! And he's not even Ukrainian. He's Georgian who got kicked out of
He's
his own
not
country.
even Ukrainian. He was actually behind the color revolution in Georgia. You can imagine. I mean, he was a professional, like, really. He was working for the U.S. State Department all along, a U.S. agent. So basically, he did a coup in Georgia. He became a president. Then he was kicked out of Georgia because of corruption. He comes to Ukraine overnight. He's given a passport, Ukrainian passport, and that's it. I give you. You become governor of Odessa. But that's I mean, there's so much more. There is so much more. And we didn't even touch the media. Lots of media are in the hands of the US.
Oh yeah.
Kyiv Independent is it's a large media. It's funded by National Endowment for Democracy. So
and the media literally go like, I've seen some from the last time I was in Russia. They literally go glorify. I mean, it is hate speech is an understatement. I'm going to say that in Russia, like most of what comes out of Ukraine is classified as rightfully as hate speech. In Switzerland, I think it would be definitely hate speech.
Yeah, well, those neo-Nazi movements, right sector and Azov battalion, they glorify Nazis and Stepan Bandera. And Stepan Bandera, who's this person, is a neo-Nazi collaborator that collaborated with the Nazis when the Nazis were in Ukraine. And they glorify him. Actually, they gave him the title of the father of the nation. Yeah, he's what Lenin used to be to the USSR.
Yeah, but you know what? With Stepan Bandera's military, the OUN, there are about 400 complaints from German Nazi officers saying that Stepan Bandera's militia is too violent, too crazy, too disgusting. Like when a German Nazi, I mean, imagine what kind of low life scum you have to be to horrify a German Nazi officer.
Yeah. So but actually, the German Nazi, they put him in prison back then because he was really an extremist, and he was actually advocating for independence. And so the Nazis, the German
No,
Nazis,
they
didn't
wanted a
want that.
colony.
So after the Second World War, World War II, he actually left. I think he went to Germany, and he was
Munich
killed, Munich, and
by
he
the
was
K-
killed there
by the KGB.
by KGB. Yeah. So you got the whole story. I mean, roughly when it comes to the neo-Nazi. Uh, so 2014, what happened? You have now you have a coup, and you have people from certain regions that start to see what happened in Ukraine, in Kiev, and they say, "Well, I elected
Yanu.
Yanukovych, and that was my president. There's a coup. And those people that are in power are extremely anti-Russian.
They
Uh,
are. I mean, I've seen entire videos where they're like, no, where the military literally marches to the tune of Moscovy, Moscovy, na noji. That means knives, so like stab the Moscovites with the knives, and we of course know that. Yeah, they are. Yes.
So they were scared. They were scared. I mean, those people they were talking about, it was ethnocentric. They wanted to build an ethnocentric state, same as Israel. It's about ethnicity. And it was Ukrainians. And then keep in mind that Ukraine has 30% of Russians. You have some minorities. You have
You
Jews. You
have
have
Lithuanians,
Polish. You
Polish,
have
everyone, because
people
Ukraine was
from Hungary. Yeah.
never a state.
Exactly. So what happens is that then you have people in Crimea. They do a referendum to leave Ukraine, and 95% of people they say, well, we don't want to be part
Oh
of
yeah,
the
Crimea
Ukraine.
also has Muslims too. And yeah, uh, it's on the edge. By the way, it's like a little
It's
peninsula.
not kind of peninsula exactly. And then you have Donbass. So Donbass, they actually vote for independence, not independence, but autonomy. So basically, they started taking arms, and so this is when yeah.
Oh, hold on one second. But this is when the Ukrainian government. Okay, this is around the time when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, and she was promoting fracking in over 40 countries. Ukraine was one of the countries, and prospectors from both Chevron and Shell found a lot of shale, as in fracking shale gas, in both Crimea and the Donbass and the Lugansk region.
It's very strategic. Actually, yeah, Lugansk and Donetsk region republics actually are the richest provinces. When we talk about especially minerals,
And
extremely
mining.
rich.
Yeah.
Mining, they're really rich.
They
So
also frack it. So now these people don't want fracking because it poisons their water. We've seen it how the water catches fire, and it's also a big farmland too. So you kind of have to choose, right?
So since then, so the civil war started. So so Eastern Ukraine is populated by a large majority of Russians, and they wanted to autonomy. Actually, they didn't want autonomy. They wanted to join the Russian Federation. A lot of people don't know that, but they didn't want even to be independent. They wanted to go back to the motherland, because the motherland for them was Russia. But Russia didn't want that. Crimea was important for Russia to get it back strategically, and also because it was an anomaly in history. It was given by Khrushchev. Khrushchev
Yeah.
gave it to Ukraine in the 50s. It didn't make any sense.
Uh,
It's one of those things that
it
it's
makes
just.
a little bit of sense in that he was still afraid that there were like stay behinds, and so it was just a way to keep an eye on them, I guess.
Well, there's lots of speculation. I mean, it's a
Yeah,
big
well, he doesn't
question
write in
mark.
his book why though.
Yeah. So, but keep in mind that the USSR back then they didn't think too much. They were like, you know what, we are one country. They didn't think that they would split one day. So it happened, and so. But keep in mind that Crimea, Crimea is so strategic. This area, it's the access to warm seas for Russia. That's the only way they can get access to warm seas. So if they if they had lost that, there was the end of Russia. I mean, really, would be dramatic. So it was a good thing. And keep in mind that the West is saying, well, the Russia invaded Crimea. It's not true. They were leasing the port of the Sebastopol, and so they were already there. So what happens is that you had a bit more troops coming in. So you had two things. You had Crimea, and then you had Donbass. And so Crimea basically was I mean, for the international community was a fait accompli. We are there, and that's ours. Okay, so it was tough move, by Putin, but he was firm, and he had to do it. It was for national.
But they've helped the economy by building the Kerch bridge, where a high and it has a high speed train that goes every day from Russia, like for 15,000 people back and forth to go get jobs and come back.
Exactly, they had to build up a train from the mainland. But there's one thing that the Ukrainians did. They actually shut down the water, drinkable water. They shut it down completely. And that's a crime against humanity. But again, you won't see that in Western media. And actually these days, the dam that they created to shut down the water, they just bombed that dam. Yeah. And now you have drinking water just flowing all the way to Crimea. So you see, since then, Donbass has been bombed, shelled. You have, I mean,
I've seen enough. Like, I've myself have seen enough like atrocities on video. Like, it's not like they're keeping this a secret. Like, just CNN may not cover it, but it's still on YouTube. It's an 8-year atrocity. Is like, I don't know how to explain. You can't show it. It's really disgusting. It's just horrible things. Very graphic. Just a lot of sadistic cruelty.
Yeah, well, civilian population. They were. I mean, no discrimination. Civilian population. Poroshenko, he did. He did a speech, and he said,
I have that speech. Hold on one
second. You
have
that speech.
He says, let me play that.
Hold on, all kids will go to school. Their kids won't. What else did he say? He said, we will give all people pensions. They won't have pension. Their kids will be in cellars, in basements. Did you leave me or? Are you still there, Esha? Or am I running the show?
I'm here. I'm just finding you that speech. So just give me 1 minute.
I think it's important to see that speech. I mean, it's very hateful. They were they I mean, for them, the Russians were just dogs. I mean, second-grade citizens.
Mm-hmm.
So during 8 years, 14,000 people died. I mean, this is it's proven. The OSCE, it's the agency that were actually tracking everything that was going on in Donbass. That's the official number, and 80% were on the Russian side.
Mm-hmm. Continue to talk. I found the speech. Now I'm just uploading it.
So they've been bombed for 8 years. I've actually interviewed Patrick Lancaster. He's a journalist in Donbass. Mm-hmm. And he's basically, he's told me, well, you have, I mean, I don't know what's the figure, but close to 2 million people that lived in basements for 8 years. So that's how they lived for 8 years.
Okay, now I'm ready to upload the speech.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I put subtitles in it like
I'm checking your live chat if there's any question there.
Okay.
Oh my God, can you see? We are going to win this war. It's their people. And actually, they were talking about collective punishment.
Yes.
Collective punishment would mean like just going to Donbass and just everybody, all the people that were running, administrators, politicians, whoever, they would be put in jail. I mean, heavy punishment. So those people, you had normal citizens, they took up arms and they fought for 8 years. They were
Yeah.
living in trenches. Can you imagine, for 8 years?
Yeah.
So Putin has been, at some point there was an agreement. They kind of won. There was a
The
humiliation for
Minsk
you.
agreement
Minsk agreement
that
one
the
and
Ukraine
two.
never implemented.
They never respected that agreement. That agreement said that we have to give a certain level of autonomy to those two republics,
And
and
move out
also,
the neo-Nazi brigades.
yeah, and also what was in the agreement? Well, stop shelling. It was also very important that protecting of the minorities, the language, and so on. And they never did.
No,
Actually,
they made
well,
Russian illegal.
they made Russian illegal. You have people around Ukraine now that they don't even speak Ukrainian, and whenever they have to do something administrative, it's all in Ukrainian. Everything is in Ukrainian. So basically, overnight, your language is eradicated. So it's a kind of pogrom against Russians. So people are actually afraid to speak Russian. They shut down Russian media.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the situation, and we have accept in
And the
Europe.
U.S. has, like, just so you know, U.S. has spent about $22 million just from the beginning of January to do anti-Russian propaganda, like pure bigotry in Ukraine, just so you know.
Yeah, well, to give you an idea, the propaganda budgets, just the agency called USAGM,
Mm-hmm.
with it's close to $1 billion. It is
Oh,
just propaganda, and actually probably close to half of that amount is just for China alone.
oh my God. Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
massive.
It's
I think we're talking about close to 500 million US dollar, and
for China alone.
it's massive. It's massive. It's very complex, but within that, US AGM finance, for example, open technology funds that actually finance Falun Gong.
Oh my.
Falun Gong. So you see, it's extremely complex, and within that, you have Radio Free Asia, Radio
Oh
Free
Lord.
Europe, and
That
so
was
on.
started by an actual Nazi like Reinhard Gehlen. Not joking. The Radio Free Asia in Europe. But yeah, the media is like a psychological warfare almost. I mean, why is it that they can't play the exact same thing to you domestically? Like, there is a reason why Voice of America is always broadcasted up Radio Free Asia. They never will play it domestically. There's a reason why.
So
They only
imagine if any country would do the same that the US is doing to other countries. I mean, it would be unthinkable. The meddling. It's massive meddling. It's hijacking democracy. So basically, in 2014, Ukraine lost its sovereignty, and sovereignty is the foundation. I mean, I don't repeat it enough, but
yeah.
you
Go
cannot
repeat
have a
it, please.
democracy if you don't have sovereignty.
You
Sovereignty
don't
is
even have
above
a country.
everything. I don't. Aisha, I don't even talk about ideology, communist or whatever. I
No.
don't even talk about this. And this actually what bothers me a lot from leftists is that they're like, oh, all this and that. I think we have fights that are extremely important. Is you fight against imperialism and you
Yep.
fight for sovereignty.
Exactly.
And after we talk about ideology, but if not the opposite, you cannot be a socialist or communist, and then you buy into imperialism.
Exactly. One thing that, like, I can explain is the difference between having sovereignty and not. Bolivia, when they rewrote their constitution, they went to village by village. They had like hundreds of thousands of people of every ethnicity. It was written in every language they spoke in Bolivia, not just Spanish, like every local language. And in fact, what they did was the people themselves wrote the constitution, and then they came together for a constituent assembly, and then they consolidated it and then had a popular referendum. In Ukraine, the constitution was written by 72 people, 13 of who were foreigners, including an American. And basically, they did not have a popular referendum on the constitution. The only thing was that the Rada approved it. So everything about the Ukrainian constitution is anti-democratic. And
No, it's a joke. Actually, even Biden, he had a say on prosecutors, which prosecutors he wanted.
oh yeah, that's our most popular video, actually.
Remember that
I
video
put
when
that up like in
you did?
2015. Yeah, that's the one. That video has the most hits. So just check
So
that
you
out.
did your homework, I can see, Esha. Well done, well done. So so it's important for people to understand that this is what Putin is doing right now. Very important, is ending a war, is not starting a war. It needs to be clear.
Yes,
This is ending a war that lasted 8 years, that killed 14,000 people. And you know what?
or more.
There might be 1,000, 2,000 people that might die these days. Okay, well, but you know what? It's ending a war and a genocide. This is a cultural genocide. We are talking about a population, Russian population, with many generations they were there, and they want to annihilate their culture.
Yes.
And they've done everything they could so they would leave. 2 million people left, 2 million Russians, they left because they were persecuted.
Yeah.
So you see, I think it's important to give the whole picture, and then you have to give the whole picture. So how big is this threat to Russia? Zelensky, you know what he said at the Munich conference? He said, we are considering acquiring nuclear weapon because they have the nuclear technology. He did say that. How stupid is that? I think
Why did he say that?
the trigger for Putin was when he heard that from Zelensky. That was the red line. He was like, you know what? I'd better hit Ukraine right now because in a few years' time, they have the technology. It would be very easy for Ukraine to acquire.
All they need is enriched
they had
uranium.
everything.
Yeah, you just need to get wherever, and uranium's everywhere.
And plus, you remember, since 2014, they've been building a port for NATO. De facto
NATO.
Ukraine was in NATO. It was de facto because you have NATO forces inside Ukraine. They were training Ukrainian forces, and then they were building infrastructure for NATO. So it was unacceptable. You have to imagine the port they were building. The distance was the same. It would be like for the US if they build a port in Tijuana. If Russia was building a port in Tijuana.
But wait, it's after let's say that Mexico killed 1/4 of the US population. Like NATO, Europe killed 27 million. So and NATO came directly from Nazis of Adolf Heusinger. So after they killed 27 million Russians, imagine if they were in Tijuana.
No, it is crazy. And imagine for Russians, if you talk to any Russian, they will tell you in their family they have they have lots of members, that they were killed by the Russians, by the Nazis. So, it's not like in the World War II. How many Americans died? 100,000.
Actually, more Indians died protecting Myanmar than Americans, to be honest.
Yeah.
So, and then
Russians, 27 million, and now you have next door, you have Nazis. They're actually bombing your own citizens, and they're talking about acquiring nuclear weapons
and annihilating you. And the military is literally like marching to the song of "Let's go kill all the Muscovites."
Yeah, they actually they have the song. They say "Slavi Ukraini," which means glory to Ukraine, and was the slogans, neo-Nazi slogans, and it has become mainstream. You know what they're doing right now? It's very interesting. I've been following them because actually the Azov battalion, some members, they came to Hong Kong in 2019.
Oh, wow.
I don't know if you remember that. And
no.
I managed to track one of them. I contacted him through Instagram.
What did he say?
And he said, I want to interview you. And he said, that's a pity, I'm at the airport. I'm going back to Kiev. His name is Serhiy Fihimonov, and he's part of the Azov battalion. So it's very interesting. I've been following him for the last 3 years. And the last 3 years, he's been actually an actor in movies that are related to revolution and gangsters. So what they've been doing, they've been actually whitewashing, recycling those people into movies, into propaganda.
So like
ISIS. making them cool. You know how you can make cool, like in Hollywood movies.
Like Vice is big part of that. Like Vice.
Yeah, exactly. Vice is a big part of that. So gangsters, you make them cool. So you're normalizing a movement, neo-Nazi, which would be completely unacceptable. So when you watch that movie, and actually one of those movies is, the name is Rhino, Rhino. You can check Google. It's going to be on Netflix. And inside you have Azov battalion actors. Yeah, that's a sad reality. It's pathetic. It is pathetic. So you see, it's but you know what they've done with the neo-Nazi? That's the equivalent that they did with Mujahideen and ISIS. You know, the
Mm-hmm.
creation was the U.S. and but the risk here is that this could become a plague. You know, it started small. Mujahideen started small, and it became really big. You know, so you have mercenaries there. So what the U.S. is doing there? What's the purpose? Now let's look at the strategy. Why hit Ukraine?
Why?
Well, you know, you create a problem between Ukraine and Russia. So basically, you don't have to fight. You create problems between Ukraine and Russia. Who's going to fight is Russia, using Russian resources. Then one purpose is also to have Europe to decouple from Russia. Extremely important. There's a strong relationship between Europe and Russia. They're buying a
Oh,
lot of gas.
so then the euro is not used as it's to devalue the euro, right?
It's not necessarily linked to the euro, but basically, if you want to enter into a cold war, you need to decouple economies. So
Mm-hmm.
what they've started a while ago in both Russia and China is trying to recouple as much as possible, because how can you go to war if you're actually trading so much, and
You won't.
especially when it comes to energy. You know, you can have a war. If you don't have Louis Vuitton, you know, it's fine. You can still have a war. But if you don't have enough gas, you cannot go to war. I mean, so you see,
And the Russia-China border is probably the biggest border on earth.
yeah. So here the purpose is there's also gas. You know, gas is big. It's a big thing. Uh, you know, Nord Stream 2 would have been revenues for Russia of around 100 billion US dollar per year. That's massive. If you look at the lifetime of this pipeline, it would have been trillions of dollars. You know, because you know the lifetime is what, 30, 50 years.
Yeah.
So what happened is that instead of that, you know, instead of Europe buying 100 billions
And
of
Russia
dollars,
does not need to use fracking, which is very bad for
yeah,
the earth. US oil is all fracked. People in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania, like their water is catching on fire.
yeah, and they have so the US is actually increasing its capacity. They have
Fracking.
overcapacity, fracking, and it's what we call energy, especially energy gas, because you need liquefied natural gas.
Russia
So
just naturally has a lot, and they don't need to use this horrible tactic called fracking.
exactly. So Europeans, they are going to end up buying gas from Americans much more expensive and less ecological. So
Mm-hmm.
you see, this is a wealth transfer. You need to look at this as a wealth transfer between the EU to the US.
To the wealthy in the US, not you in the US.
Yeah, of course, of course. But the thing is that, and it's actually solving the problem of a trade deficit. You see,
Oh, because US has a
it,
huge trade deficit with China,
yeah, exactly.
and
So
they
the
need hard
US, with one
currency.
stone, they're killing many birds, many birds. They actually, uh, it's a further integration with the Europe economy. So Europe is going to be completely dependent on the US. I mean, once you cut the tie with Russia, what you lost with Russia, you need to find ways to get it somewhere else. So you have the US. When it comes to gas, the US, and you're going to have Qatar and other, maybe Algeria, other countries. So
Libya.
so Libya. So you see, and the big losers here are the EU and Ukraine. And short term, the US is a winner, is a big winner here, big winner, because without doing much, you create chaos, divide and conquer. You have extra trade. You decouple Russia with the EU, but then long term, I think the US has made a huge mistake, and especially this decoupling, especially when it comes to SWIFT.
What exactly is SWIFT?
It's a way of communicating between banks. The network is 14,000 banks, and it's mainly for transactions using dollars.
Mm-hmm.
So once you have this large economy, which is Russian economy, it's extremely large. I mean, in nominal terms, is not that big, But when you talk about purchasing power parity, I think it's probably the fifth. I think it's the fifth or the sixth largest economy in the world. It's at the level of Germany.
Mm-hmm.
So if this country is not going to use dollar, is going to use other currency, this would actually accelerate what we call the de-dollarization. The dollar is the global currency, and this is the high
Renminbi.
standard of living in the US. It's because you have this ability to
Print.
print free money. It's a free. I call it a free paper toilet currency because the day that people don't trust your currency, you cannot print it like you do now.
No, well, it's because it's the like the currency that the IMF deals with, and yeah.
Yeah,
So
well,
Russia.
yeah, well, it's related. It's the after war. There was a Bretton Woods, and the Bretton Woods was how we are going to control the war, the world. It was okay. We are going to establish a world currency, the US dollar, and actually the US dollar was very strong because it was backed by huge reserves of gold. So it didn't make sense back then because the US became extremely rich after the World War II because all the economies were
Looting.
destroyed, and the US actually never stopped producing massively because they were fueling in products the economies. I mean, especially weapons. All those economies. Who actually how the USSR won the war because the US provided huge loans to the USSR in exchange to weapons, and that's how the balance, the shift of power, the USSR won ultimately. So at the end of the war, there was the US had a huge gold reserve because of that, this trade surplus, and they sat around the table and they decided, okay, well,
but around this table, you don't have India, you don't have China, you don't have a single person in Africa because these are all still colonized.
Exactly.
So the majority of the world is not in this table.
Well, they there was a Yalta, they met also at Yalta.
Yeah, but I'm just saying at the Bretton Woods conference, most of the world is not at this table.
No, they were. I mean, for them, they were not humans, and they're still not humans.
Exactly, Vietnam, like none of us. No, exactly, and so like I said, most of the world was not at the table. It was just the.
At best, not humans. At best, consumers.
Exactly. Well, I mean, whatever they were, they were. It was, yeah. It was before India was formed. It was before China was formed. It was before Vietnam existed. Indonesia, no, it didn't exist. When you don't have, I mean, India, China, Indonesia are the three most populated countries in the world, and they're not there. So you can just, and then none of Africa was there because or the Middle East. Yeah.
So they started the new world order started there, like how are we going to share, control better the world.
Mm-hmm.
And was, and they started actually talking about how we are going to create EU, because EU is a US creation. It was financed by the CIA. The father of the EU, Jean Monnet, was a CIA agent. The first president of the EU was a Nazi recycled.
Yeah, Walter Hallstein. He wrote love letters. Like, I mean, he's not a former Nazi, and he literally wrote like he was a Hitlerite till the end of Hitler.
Exactly. So you see, and so they had to put some structure in place, and so that's when they created the IMF, the World Bank, kind of, and the rule between those institutions was to, the US had veto power, in those organizations, and so they managed. So they were created, and they still now it's a tool just to to put countries into debt trap.
Yeah.
What they're accusing China of doing, they're actually doing themselves. So lending money at very high interest rates.
Bolivia is the best example I can give you, where they actually what they did was, it was not even it was not even a loan. It was called capitalization, as in the companies just got a free for all from the IMF, and then they privatized.
They even privatized water. You
Yeah,
had
even the rain.
farmers. You had farmers that water. They could take the water that was when it was raining, and it didn't allow those farmers to take that water. Can you imagine the basic human rights? And actually, the World Bank. Yeah, I don't know what's the percentage, but I think it's 30% or 40% of the loans they're giving. It's under the conditions of privatization of water.
Yeah, water is something you need to live. Yeah, but what happens is that, like, you should speak to what's his name, Fadil Kabub. He'll explain how it becomes a cycle, because first, when you privatize everything, you have nothing to pay back the debts with.
Yeah.
And then the capital gets exported back to Europe, and then you're also not food, like, so it's just a cycle to keep people, it's a cycle to keep the world the way it is, status quo. Third world's going to be third world, and first world's going to be first world.
Yeah, well, I think there's one topic which is really important, just to really understand how this is played, and it's all around the dollar. So I'm just going to try to make it simple as much as possible.
Okay, go ahead.
After World War II, there was a trade surplus. What is a trade surplus? Is that the US is selling more than it's buying.
Value-added goods, not more, but more certain kind of goods.
Yeah, I mean, basically value-added goods, and they're buying raw materials and they transform it and they sell it for more expensive. So trade surplus. What happens is that the gold, because it was pegged to the dollar was pegged to gold. They could claim gold in exchange. So
one day, in theory, I guess, if you had enough.
So they had huge reserve of gold up to the 70s. In the 70s, the US started spending a lot of money in wars, especially Vietnam War. It was terrible for the US economy. And so now they started to run a deficit. So what happens is that, you start to have some president like de Gaulle. He goes to the federal bank. He said, well, now I have this excess of dollars. Well, why don't you exchange me against gold?
And what did they do?
Well, they start emptying the coffers, slowly. It was like sending ships of money, and he was going back with gold. And then, the reserve of gold was going down.
Oh.
And then what happens is that in 1971, you have Nixon that says, oh, we are going to stop that. We are going to stop that. No more. Now we are going to, we're not going to give you gold. And this is, from that moment, the US dollar was backed by nothing. It was just by gun. Yeah, it was backed by gun, actually. It was imposed on countries. It was actually imposed on the Middle East countries, Saudi Arabia. There was a Quincy agreement. It was basically
1973, Saudi Arabia was like, okay, we're not doing this. We need real money. Actually, all the Gulf countries were like, okay, no, we're not giving you oil unless you kind of give us something real.
Yeah, but they impose dollar. This is why they call it the petrodollar. So they impose those commodities to be traded in dollar. So from then on, you have this system of whatever. The US was running since the 70s trade deficit. Trade deficit is you buy more than you sell.
You buy more value-added goods. So that's why the factories went all the way to cheap labor, like in
not yet.
Indonesia.
Not yet. Yeah. Of course, they were selling high valid goods, and they were buying low added value goods.
Okay.
But because they were buying so much more than they were selling, they were running a trade deficit. So what happens that how do you compensate? You start to run a deficit. So then they were starting to ask those countries, well, you have to invest into our debts. So they were buying bonds. So bonds, IOU, bonds, and they were giving interest. And they kept on doing that up to the moment recently, the last 10 years, You have Russia and China that started saying, well, we're not going to do that. We are not going to finance you free lunch because, that debt, it's not supposed to be repaid. And it's being just printing money. So you have
And
the
the funny thing
US.
is, Russia and China, maybe India for the past 10 years, literally has enough reserves that they can pay anybody's IMF debt off.
Yeah, they actually, it's good you mentioned India. India, Russia, and China have been accumulated massive amounts of golds. So China, they've been running a trade surplus, accumulation of,
huge one.
we're talking about close to $4 trillion, around $4 trillion. What they did, some of those are into US bonds,
Yeah,
but they
that's why they
stopped
were
buying.
able to just like bail out Pakistan like that from the IMF. They're just like, okay, here's Pakistan's debt.
Yeah, but they stopped actually financing the US debt for the last 10 years, close to the last 10 years. They bailed out the US in 2008 in the financial crisis. So what China did, they were running a huge trade surplus for many years. All these years, they've been recycling US dollar into the Belt and Road Initiative and into gold. But by doing that, the Ponzi scheme stops. You're stopping that. So now you have de-dollarization. You have less countries that are using dollar.
Yeah, like
And
like Venezuela and Russia had some deal where, and then they both did not use the dollar. I forgot what they used, but Iran and India didn't have a deal with Iran selling oil, not using the dollar.
They have swaps, like system, like a tool.
Yeah, some I don't, and then the renminbi has bin kind of popular with China and Africa.
Yeah. So what happens that then you're attacking the fundamentals of a U.S. economy. There's a high standard of living at the expenses of the global South.
Yes.
And because they have a power to print as much as they want dollars, and it doesn't need to be repaid anyway. You just increase your debt. But then, Russia and China, they went against this system. And this is actually for the US, it's a de facto declaration of war because it's a war against the whole system.
But that's why they're acting so. To me, I was wondering, like, it seems like this is an overreaction to the Belt and Road Initiative, but it's not if you see it from. I see what you're saying, right?
Yeah, I mean, once the dollar is no more the global currency, what is going to happen is what happened to every single country. You print more money,
and then inflation
you create
happens.
inflation, and
Germany.
then you create hyperinflation. The same as Weimar
Republic.
Weimar Republic, hyperinflation. The same as I just came back from Venezuela. There was hyperinflation, just madness. So that's the risk, and you start to see that now. In the US, the inflation in 2000 last year official was 7.5%, but in reality, if you were to calculate inflation according to how they were calculating inflation in the 80s, the system would be 15%.
Okay, so what they did is they changed. It's kind of like the World Bank trick where they how they changed the definition of poverty. So with inflation, they kind of have a random selection of.
Yeah, you choose your basket.
Basically, that basket. But then
it's a basket of goods. Yeah.
But it's supposed to be a random select, like a certain kind of random selection. But instead, they kind of substitute. Like if you substitute, I don't know.
Gas, rental. Especially
milk or cheese or whatever. I don't know the price of anything. So.
And actually, it's consumption. The thing is that when you talk about the inflation, there's a consumptions goods. The goods you buy. Your standard of living. But then there's also asset inflation. And asset inflation, we don't even talk about this. Meaning what? Meaning that a house that you could afford maybe last year and this year actually is 20% more expensive, and you need three lifetimes to be able to buy it. We don't even talk about this. So basically, inflation, what is it? It's actually hidden tax. It's basically you impoverishing yourself. If you make the same amount of money and there's 15% of inflation, you actually have lost 15% of power or purchasing power. So
seven. Wait, what was it? What's a normal? What's a normal U.S. Okay, let's say that everything was going as good as it should, as the U.S. wants it to. What is a normal inflation rate for a year?
well, I think there are some acceptable. This is not a normal. I think those some are acceptable. Inflation. If you're talking about a normal consumer, you should have if there's inflation of 5% and you have an increase of salary of 5%, that's okay. You have a compensation there. But if you have inflation of 5% and there's no compensation in salary, then there is a problem because you are poorer by 5%.
Yeah.
That's the main problem. But I think the acceptable rate is somewhere between 1% to 5%. Otherwise, I think there's a tipping point. Once you pass a certain level, then it can become a vicious circle.
And they can't, and because it's a alleged free market, they can't do price controls either, so they're screwed.
Yeah, exactly. So, how do they?
No, you were saying it's important for people to understand why the U.S. sees whatever like non-threatening things like the Belt and Road Initiative for a normal person as a declaration of war, and it is a kind of to them they cannot. I mean, I read the Council for Foreign Relations report. They say that they can't sustain it with China. China is literally, they admit that China has a better deal. Every country should probably get China to build their stuff. We don't know how to do it. They do. But
no, there's more to that. Belt and Road Initiative. Actually, you're recycling trade surplus into the global south.
Yeah.
You are industrializing. Imagine this is for the US. It's criminal to industrialize the global south. They've done everything they could just to make sure they have no electricity. There's no roads. There's no education. They keep mortality high.
Because you need children, you need cheap labor to like be mining your raw cobalt in the Democratic. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like we interviewed the head of the Kenyan Communist Party, and he was explaining like what the difference is. And oh my god, like with Kenya, even when you have like something like a train, that literally means your girls get to go to school as opposed to girls don't go to school. There's a huge difference, like whether or not your girls go to the second grade and to third grade and to even college.
So, well, you see, I mean, extremist part from China, so the Belt and Road Initiative is one stone, and you kill so many birds. You find a way to recycle your US dollar trade surplus into tangible assets. If you have a debt to the US, you give money, they give you bonds, it's IOU, right? It's a paper.
Yeah.
Well, if you use US dollar to invest into infrastructure, it's a tangible asset.
Yeah,
you can see it, line. You can touch it,
It's a high-speed rail that can take you places.
Yeah. So then you invest that into the global south. You make friends in the global south. Politically, it's interesting. Then you open new markets. Well, they actually, if they are prosperous, they are going to become your customers as well.
Yeah.
So you see, and then actually because it's infrastructure, you are shortening the lead time too. Yeah. Once you have a lead time shorter, then you have more exchanges and a better integration. So imagine, when you have, Chinese, what they say, if you want to become rich, you start building a road.
Well, I always imagine taking a train all the way from Coimbatore, India, and going all the way to Portugal, like in one high-speed rail. Like that's imagine that.
No, but it's a revolution. It's really a revolution. And you see what Chinese say? They say, well, a Belt and Road Initiative is not an ambition for China. It's an ambition that China has for the world.
Yeah.
Because it's a unique in the world history. They even proposed to the US. You know what they proposed? They proposed a line which would go from Beijing all the way to Washington, going from the Arctic. Going to the Arctic.
From Siberia. Okay.
Something madness.
That's awesome.
The cost would be $200 billion. But
the thing is that will say, like, it's actually train is the best way to transport a lot of people. Airplanes are very polluting. Like, if you can just like get if you change 90% of the air travel to like train travel, you're dealing with climate change effectively.
Absolutely. And then, but you know, now new technology. I mean, the fastest train now, it's still experimental. They started like a trial, trying like a short.
Oh, thank you so much, Kami John. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, there's a line now existing, small line, but it goes to it's 600 kilometers per hour. So it's as fast as a plane. It's just crazy.
And where does it go?
It's in Chengdu. But
Chengdu. That's near Tibet.
Yeah, actually, Chengdu is a Sichuan province, and actually, that province has there's lots of Tibetans minority in Chengdu.
Yeah,
in Sichuan area.
Okay, that's why I okay. So and where does that train head to from Chengdu?
Oh, it's like the lines in the train lines in China. We are talking about 100,000 kilometers.
So
there's probably I think there's probably more train lines in terms of distance than the rest of the world. It's just it's just absolutely madness, and they did that in a very short time, in 15 years. Really, most of it is the last 15 years.
And it's so like I actually got in. This is so weird. Like this was my most controversial tweet. I don't understand. Like there was a very beautiful bridge, and I said, "Oh, what a pretty bridge in China! You can't build this under capitalism." And this like congressman and stuff starting to go crazy. I'm like, how did that me saying what a pretty bridge cause this much controversy?
Yeah, what you see in you know how they say in China they build like so much in 10 years. When it comes to the US, for example, in 10 years they haven't even chosen the name of the bridge.
Exactly.
You see, that's how it is. The thing is that's the advantage of central planning and like tough government, really, and also
they
planification.
Think about the future, and they think about
planification.
The future.
Exactly. You in the Western democracies, they are worried about the next election, and it's when it lasts only 4 years. It's interesting. You see those governments. They every time they blame the other. So you have Clinton that get into power. He said, well, it was Bush, and then after Bush, there's this one. And Trump, he was like, no, it's Obama.
Now it's Trump. Yeah,
and Biden is saying, well, it was Trump. You see, it's like
but
you have a game.
But we have a government that's designed to literally protect those with property. James Madison said this, from those without. So it'll be nobody, if that makes sense. Like nobody's going to, unless you like have a massive change in the structure, it's the same old story.
Yeah. But actually, Esha, I know you're very much in contact with the socialist, communist, crowd, and I think it's important. I think it's important to look at what China did and how it did it. How they used actually capitalist tools just to ultimately the goal is to reach socialism and communism.
And they did it with a lot of patience.
So you see, the thing is that they were really smart to how can I play with capitalist tools, because they needed funding, and they needed, most important, what the global South needs. It's technologies. They need industrialization and technology and so on. So if you are poor and you are socialist and you don't open up yourself, you need to do some concessions at the beginning, and that's what China did.
But
it doesn't mean they're using market economy, but the ultimate goal is to have a socialist society.
Well, they did three. Like in China, it's kind of very interesting in that there are sectors. There are three kinds of sectors. One that will never be privatized. One that sometimes can be privatized, and what you realize is the things that they allow to be privatized are like stupid stuff that you don't really
need. Well, there's a strategic. There's a strategic. But you see the problem is that the economy is run by Wall Street in the US, and Wall Street has one obsession is return on investment. Okay, return on investment is profit, and then investment. So what happens is that if you want to have the best ratio, you need to have low investment to have the highest ratio. So basically, the only way to do that is focusing on low capital intensive.
Like, yes, like as in like iPhone apps. You're not going to be spending it on pharmaceuticals, which you're not going to get a penny until you invest $1 billion, like the cure for all these diseases, because that's not, you're not getting a quick return on investment. So
No,
it's going to be,
well, what I mean by investment is the solid stuff. It's like factories. It's
yeah,
about industries and so on. If you are just a brand, I give you an example. Nestle, it's typical. Nestle, has sold all its factories because he wanted the ROE, which is return on investment, to have a high ROE. So what you do is you divest all the solid stuff and you just become brand. It's extremely high added value. But the thing is that you get into an economy which is all financialized. It's all
yeah.
not tangible. China was very careful about this. If it's run by Wall Street, you are going to disindustrialize. And that's where actually, I'm not pro-Trump, but that is where Trump was
He
absolutely
was
right.
actually did say, yeah, he said the right things, but didn't do crap because he's
Yeah,
not smart.
I think it was the right thing. I mean, for again, just
He's
it's
not
good.
smart.
It was a mistake. It was a mistake to disinvest in the U.S.
Oh,
and send it all to
of course,
China.
but they got greedy.
Disindustrialize. They got greedy again.
Yeah,
China is they were playing by their rules, by the rules of the WTO,
yeah.
and capitalistic rules, and they won because they're smarter, they're hungry.
And
Uh,
then they took a long-term planning, like they took the second, like they thought about the second, third level consequences. The US doesn't.
well, you see, that's the if you look at the background of politicians in China and the US.
Look at it. Yeah,
In the
Xi has
US,
so much experience.
you
It's
have
amazing.
lawyers, and you have bankers. I'm asking you, what do bankers and lawyers bring to economy?
Not
They bring
absolutely nothing.
nothing, nothing, nothing. But then on the other side, you know what you have on the other side, the Chinese, you have
Ex-
engineers.
you
They
have
use
everything, actually. You have a
scientific.
little
You have
bit of
everything.
everything,
Yeah.
because like you have to, like, it's a very interesting system in like how you get into government. There like you have to pass some exams, and then you have to do the, like you have to get the go on the lowest level and then get approval of a certain people.
Yeah.
It's like a hybrid. I don't know how to say it, but it's a very cultural specific but very good system.
Oh, Esha, can I see one question? I think it's an interesting question.
Go ahead.
A lot of people don't know about this. He's asking, this is Dmitry Ulyanov. He's asking, I need help understanding the plan Deng initiated. So,
Oh,
the opening up
go
of
ahead.
China and the reform started with Deng. So before that, China was completely communist.
Well,
So
no, China was completely a closed.
closed
Oh,
economy
yeah, yeah.
was it was it was it's very similar to the USSR. You have kind of communes, but I won't. Let's go into what he did. He was looking into trying the tools. How the Chinese are is, how can I learn from others? How they're doing, and we are going to do some tests. He used a metaphor called, you touch the stone to cross the river.
Yeah, actually, if you look, there's something called Deng Xiaoping thought, as in like there's like a he was very open about this. Like
Yeah,
it's actually available for free. You can download it, and he'll
yeah.
explain his logic and he was not like his Americans are a little weird. They somehow just don't understand when people are open. You know
You know
what I
what he
mean?
said? You know what he said? He said, it doesn't matter if the cat is white or black, as long as it catches the mouse.
Yeah, but
You see
Deng,
how important is that? How important is that? It gives you so much more flexibility, because if you are stuck with the black cat, well, then it's over. Give yourself more possibilities. So what he did, he started trying the capitalist tools in some areas, what he called SEZ, Special Economic Zone,
exactly, and then he
SEZ. And then, so he started actually in Shenzhen. Shenzhen was and in other places, Zhuhai, few areas in China. And Shenzhen was actually a village, a very small village. They had like, maybe 100,000 people, and now it's over 10 million population after since 80 after 30 years. Can you imagine? So it started there, and basically it was just trying, does it work, yes or no? And from what he learned in those special economic zone, he started applying to the country.
Yeah, it was like the good stuff they got to learn from, and then the bad stuff, like they. And another thing is what they didn't realize is that these companies, there's two things. They had the stock dilution clause and then the trade secret. So after like so many years, these companies had to just like boom, give all their IP to the country of China. But
Yeah,
why did
they were
they like?
so smart. They were like, I'm not going to produce only for you. You want to sell to us? Well, you come to produce in China, and you do a transfer of technology. All along, every single business, Chinese were looking to how can you transfer technology? How can we buy technology?
Hold on. How come these companies agreed, like these big companies with like hundreds of lawyers, how come they agreed to this, like the tech transfer clause? Like, do you have any idea?
Greed. There's so much money to be made in China.
So
The
they were not thinking about what happens.
No, I think they didn't see it coming. You see, the thing is that they started dealing with China because they were hoping that they could do a color revolution and they could actually liberalize China. Well, this is
Oh,
why they got so angry. They really thought, and this is, the first color revolution in China. I mean, and the only
was
color
that in
revolution,
Tiananmen?
Tiananmen Square. They
Yeah,
were all there. Gene Sharp, the one that
who wrote the
actually
book?
wrote the book, Einstein Foundation. He's the one actually was there on the ground. And you had Radio Free Asia, Reuters. I mean, they were all there. They were
Yeah.
pushing for these narratives, and they were pushing the protesters. Well, now, they started actually,
It was really funny. Like, I remember this Western media was like, they killed the protesters. And then one of the protesters himself was like, I'm not dead. Here I am. Look, not dead. Like, I mean, he's been trying to do this for the past 40, 30 years now. Like, last time he did it was like around 2015. He's like, I'm not dead. They didn't kill me. Like,
no.
it's like,
Well, the estimate is they talk about 300 deaths.
But that was on the side of the Chinese government.
Half and half, half the protesters and half militaries and policemen. I mean, roughly. And actually, the real story is that nobody died on the square. They died around.
Yeah.
Around the square,
and the tank, the tank man. So according to what the WikiLeaks says, the some Spanish cameraman says that he accidentally got the footage mixed up and he reverse edited it, and then the US. Yeah, it's nonsense.
The full footage actually is it does he just run away. Some people
he just stops and then he
grab
goes.
it. They grab him and then he goes. Yeah. So it's all about this misinformation. So you see that they tried with China. They thought that China, they could change Chinese culture. They could change the
change
system.
1,005. You can't change the you just can't do
it.
But
Chinese, they were smart. They were like pretending, playing with that. The thing is that but remember, it's important that why Nixon went to China back then, because Nixon wanted to use China against Russia and the USSR back then, and China never did the all the way. They had tensions between the USSR and China, but they were kind of pretending. China was pretending that it was backing the US against the USSR because China was extremely poor. It was extremely weak. And it needed funding. So it said, you know what, we are going to do reforms. They actually close an eye on their sovereignty. And basically they say, oh, you need to change that. And they say, okay, well, give me funds. And so you had the funding came from different parts. But I mean, the US did lots of funding. Then you had money coming from Taiwan. Japan, there's huge investment of Japan. It's interesting that, like back then,
Japan fell. Like in the 80s, people were like talking about how Japan was going to be a big economy, and it just stagnated.
Yeah, but they did exactly. Well, in Japan was in the same situation as China in the last few years. They had a huge trade surplus, and they imposed on Japan some restriction, and that's when they had the Plaza Accord. and this actually wrecked the economy of Japan, because Japan was supposed to surpass the economy of the US. You remember, if you remember, I mean, back then they were actually in the US, they were smashing Japanese cars and TVs.
Why?
The same, well, because they were doing the Japan bashing the same as they were doing China bashing. The same, they did the
Oh,
same, and they put pressure on Japan. Keep in
but
mind that Japan
Japan's
had tens of thousands of army personnel. You know, it was a colony. So basically, they were like, I mean, because of the Plaza Accord, Japanese economy has been stagnant since. You know,
what's the Plaza Accord?
it was an agreement between the U.S. and Japan. It was basically on the level. It was related to liberalization and also to the level of the value of the yen. You know, the Japanese yen. So
Whoa,
they made the
so
yen too expensive to be competitive. So the product, you know, the product, Japanese product, they became less
why did
competitive.
Japan agree to this? What did they get?
Gone. There's no choice.
Why not?
Well, the only, but you know, you need you know, the tools of the US are, there's plenty of ways, you know, to destabilize a country. You know, it's just, you know, you don't, you know, you know what we're experiencing these days with Russia is that Putin has said that the only language that the US understand is
Violent.
violence.
He's right, actually.
So Japanese, they knew what they, you know, you have when you have received two nuclear bombs,
Mm-hmm.
when actually the nuclear bombs were launched when war was over. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, people don't, you know, it's one of the biggest crime against humanity. They knew what they had in front of them. So you know, it was like in the Godfather. I'm going to make an offer that you cannot refuse.
Oh, okay. Got it. Okay.
You
So,
remember that, right?
yeah. Okay. I see. And so that's when the Japanese economy stagnated. Now why what did China do differently then?
It's much larger economy. It was. I think it's there's different reasons. I think the U.S. was just too busy waging wars around the world. They didn't see it coming, and China was slowly building up its economy, doing transfer of technology,
Mm-hmm.
slowly building up its army. You know, like low key, low
Mm-hmm.
profile, still backing the U.S. Not so much. You know, just you know what Chinese say. You know, sayings are really important in Chinese.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the pig doesn't want to get too big. You know why?
Why?
Because once it gets big, that's the time it's gonna get killed and eaten.
Ah, that's a smart saying. Well,
Low profile, keep low profile. You build up you know, slowly. You make your alliances and so on. You're not gonna go right away. You know, you just slowly, just don't. You know, and
yeah,
low profile, and
that's
somehow.
completely the opposite of the West shock doctrine. You know what I mean? The shock doctrine just goes whoosh.
No, it was long-term plan. But because of China has suffered hundreds of years of humiliation, they were, you know, when they were humiliated, they were thinking, they were giving to the next generation, teaching them, you know, we have to work against that. Next time we are going to be in a position, it's going to be different.
And it has.
And you see, you had the meeting between Blinken and the Chinese, and the Chinese, they said, you cannot talk with us on a position of strength. And you know, it's so
And
important to
it's
understand this whole
you mean
history.
just that fact offended like it's like they were like Blinken was just offended, and it's like go you don't have he couldn't even negotiate because he really does not have anything to offer in the table, but he was
Well,
offended.
well, you see, there's a. Well, it's important to, when you look at the relationship China and the U.S. And keep in mind that now we have a confrontation, China, Russia, and NATO. But the ultimate goal for the globalist is China. You know, Russia is only intermediate. They want to do a color revolution. You know,
They want to
change it.
destroy Russia and turn it into Afghanistan.
But the next one is China,
Yep.
and you know, there's a Rand Corporation paper, extremely important.
What
If
does
you
it
want to,
say?
if you want to understand long-term policy, it's about like looking at those papers. You need to look at the 2016 paper.
I will.
That paper says that the US has a 10 years window of opportunity to actually contain China. After that, it will be too late, for the simple reason that you won't be able to do a blockade on the Malacca Strait. The
Because
trade routes.
you don't need the Malacca Strait anymore if you have alternate.
You have Belt and Road Initiative, exactly, and then so the Navy by 2025, the Chinese Navy will be much larger and will be much more powerful. And actually, by then that time, China will be able to do power projection. So have maybe a few bases outside China, so they can project force.
Just so you know, China has like decrypted everything. Like, so there was an article about how all these like CIA agents in Africa were going dead, and that's because China shared the data with them, which is, which is ultimately a good thing. But there's China has the and apparently, according to what Putin said, they've cracked whatever encryption crap that the U.S. used to do to Maidan. So that's what Putin said. And Tokoyev also said that same thing.
But just you have to look at. There are so many, smart people in China. In terms of proportions, when you talk about the science, math, technology, engineering, you have 6 to 7 times more of engineers in China than in the US. So imagine just in terms of
there's 1 billion. So, and that's a lot of smart, a lot of innovators.
in proportion more than in the US. And if you look at the people in science, math, and technology in the US, studying in the US, you have a good 30%, 40% sometimes that are actually foreigners, and many Chinese. So you see, that is a problem. You cannot fight against that. It's just because it's a society which is based more on tangible stuff, creating stuff, engineering. They're extremely strong. You cannot fight that, really. The idea is not to fight; it's how we can work together.
But the American government, they're just like, read the State Department cables, and I don't know what to say besides they are demented. They are very demented. The way they think, it's incredibly demented. So they're like this. The scorpion, the story about the scorpion and the frog. The frog says, hey, the scorpion says, hey, can you carry me across the river? And the frog says, no, I cannot, because you're going to bite me. But then the scorpion says, but then we'll both drown. And the frog thinks, and then in the middle, the scorpion goes in. And then this frog asks, why are you doing this? We're both going to die. And then the scorpion says, it's in my nature. That's the US government, is the scorpion.
Yeah, it's the problem is that it's about history. The thing is that when you deal into finance, for example, foundation of finance, you look at the past, and very often the future, there's a reflection in the future of what you had in the past. Past performances, you can do some projections in the future. Well, it's the same. When you look at China, you need to look at its history, and China throughout history never had the imperialistic ambitions.
They call themselves the Middle Kingdom, as in they know that they're in the middle of India and Russia.
Yeah. And it's China is more than a country. It's a civilization state. It's a continent. The nation of country is different for China. This is why you have so many different cultures within China. You have over 50 nationalities.
Oh, yeah.
Hundreds of languages. So when you look at Chinese history, they could have conquered the world. The Santa Maria, Christopher Colombo, when he went to America, at the same time, the Chinese Navy they had 30,000. They used to go around Southeast Asia with 30,000 Navy men, 30,000. And the largest ship was 10 to 20 times bigger than Santa Maria. They
But
discovered America.
okay, a lot of people think it was irrational, but the reason was they kind of destroyed all the ships. Was it was a quarantine against the bubonic plague, just so people understand.
Yeah, there's
It was a
different
quarantine.
version. There's a different version, but also one of the things. I mean, there was an admiral called John He, and because he was actually he was actually he had so much power. They were scared of this power, So because he was, he was in charge of trade, and trade was actually through trade they were getting lots of silver, so they were afraid. There were tensions between the admiral and the emperor. So there might be one of the reasons. So
But in the book Genghis Khan, Making of the Modern World, they
yeah,
talk about how like in China, like the first sign of like the bubonic plague, they saw this, and then they said nobody's leaving, nobody's coming.
might
They
be.
destroyed all the ships. But
I'll have to check that. It would make sense, because the thing is that it's just madness what they did. I mean,
well, no. It contained the plague because
okay.
Europe lost half. Lots of people.
So they assume this came from outside, and they say we have to protect ourselves. And
yeah, literally, like, so there were these Italian merchant ships that were also destroyed and stuck in China for about 3 years. But then when they came back to Italy, it was like, oh my God, everyone's dead. So I read this in Genghis Khan's Making of the Modern World. I'll send it to you, actually.
yeah, I see some comments, interesting comments. Michael
ahead,
Hudson
read them.
talks a lot about China's economy, how they're avoiding neoliberalism. I got, oh my God, I have the book right here.
What's it called?
One sec.
Thank you so much, Dimitri, for the super chat. That's so sweet.
Here I am.
Yeah, well, the problem is if I look at the chats, I can't be coherent and talk. So I have a policy of not looking now that I have a video camera.
Okay, Super Imperialism. This is an amazing book. I really recommend. Actually, if you want to learn about this whole imperialism through the currency, everything that we talked about before, about the trade balance,
Okay, Angelo, stay here 1 second. Can you talk? And I'll be somebody's at the door.
Okay, maybe I'll get some questions. If you guys, I see there are 25 people. So Michael Hudson talks about China's economy, how they're avoiding neoliberalism. Yeah, they're using the tools of trading tools, and actually it is very smart. You need to open your economy, and you need to get access to high technology. That's what China did. And so they run a high trade surplus, so huge reserves of dollars. And what they did was just to recycle this into the Belt and Road Initiative.
Sorry, it was Amazon.
Yeah.
Yeah, I ordered. Okay, so it was just a book on Russian cursive, but don't worry about it. What were you saying?
No, I was just reading the questions. Questions from the live chat.
Oh yeah, that's a great idea. I would put it up, but like I said, I get distracted. So this is something that we have. So you should read and filter and answer, read it out loud, and then we can answer them together.
Yeah. So here, there's someone saying, I saw a map supposedly from Dick Cheney about the speculative balkanization of Russia. Of course, they did it once. Actually, the balkanization of the USSR was I mean, behind that you had the CIA big time.
Oh,
actually,
but then
yeah.
Oh, I was just gonna say then they started this Chechnya thing, but Putin put an end to that.
Exactly. I mean, this, it's they've been repeating this over and over. It's just and it would be unacceptable. They would never accept any countries to do what they did to Russia. I mean, everywhere.
It's disgusting.
I've experienced that first-hand experience in when I was living in Venezuela. Just right after the Chavez was elected, they started pouring so much money back then, and also in Hong Kong. I mean, you had literally CIA agents running the streets, teaching kids how to throw petrol bombs.
that you use that literally is going on in was going on in Ukraine for a while. Yeah, the democracy promote. I mean, actually, Myanmar. I mean, what kind? The Rangers in Myanmar. Come on, they're just so open.
Training, they're training. It's those imperialist training. We are going to teach you what is it to have a democracy, all values and so on. And actually, when you look at the democracy they want to export, it's going to be, neoliberal. It's going to be about selling your state-owned assets, and liberalize the whole economy, and and turning into an economy for the 1%. There's a there's a question: how is Taiwan microchip manufacturing likely to relate to U.S. pressure towards separatism? I think this is something which is really important. The microchip industry in Taiwan, it's extremely valuable for the U.S. I mean, Ukraine is not important to the U.S., but Taiwan is, especially when it comes to semiconductors and microchips. So what they're doing now is that TSMC is actually starting to invest in Nevada, and they're transferring actually this extremely valuable industry outside of Taiwan. You know, I mean, how good is that?
I
Is
mean,
it? Yeah.
Taiwan has what happened is that the KMT kind of became wise, and then they got the DPI.
DPP.
Yeah.
KMT is the original Kuomintang party, and they are the people that actually left in 49 after when they lost. They left from the mainland. They went to Taiwan, and they've been running. They've been running the country until 89. It was a dictatorship.
But I mean, towards the end, the KMT apparently did some good things for Taiwan,
Yeah.
and that's when the
DPP.
and they're just like
That's the
nuts.
worst one. It's madness. That's the worst one.
They're nuts.
They're not, I mean, the first they got into power twice. The first time was Chen Shui-bian, and he was completely corrupted. Actually, he went to jail.
Oh,
Was big, and but like in democracies, people that got into power, they get into jail. They don't stay much time in jail. We see it everywhere in Sarkozy in France. I mean, everywhere. How many times have you seen in Western style democracies people that were in politics corrupted that spent 10 years in jail? Even the last one in Korea, she got into jail for, it was like 20 years sentence in
well, at
jail,
least
and she
they
went
go to
out after
jail.
2 years.
But at least they go to jail. In America, they don't. You have all these war criminals that are like, then they, yeah. There's none impunity here. There's nothing they can. Nothing will. They can. There is not a single thing that the president can do that will make him go to
Yeah,
jail.
yeah.
That including
So
nuking half the world. I mean, literally, there is no war. Nothing he can. Yeah.
So go back to DPP. Actually, Tsai Ing-wen, in 2004, she was actually there are WikiLeaks, cables saying that she was having secret meetings already back then with the de facto American embassy in Taiwan.
Oh yeah,
So
there's not a. Oh.
she is actually a U.S. agent. Ample proof, and actually she pretends she has I mean, it's unheard of. She pretends she has 1.5 PhDs. Bless you.
What PhDs?
Yeah, I've never heard about something like this. I mean, she has 1.5 PhDs, and
How do
they're
you have a
fake.
1.5 PhD?
She's got her own theory, but they're even fake. It's from the London school, and they're even fake. So there's a huge case, and lots of intellectuals, they're actually fighting against her because they're fake PhDs. They're not. Normally you have to have a thesis that actually it's public, and they never release the thesis. So you see, I mean, this is the type of people that you have in Taiwan, and because the U.S. has been pouring lots of money into Taiwan's democracy, and if you look at the media, the biggest media actually are pro-U.S. and they made sure that all the pro-Chinese media, they just shut them down.
Yep.
That's what they did.
Yeah, like the US can never actually handle a fair fight because it's not that hard. I mean, it's a so yeah. But Angelo, thank you so much for
Yeah,
coming
we,
on.
we did more than what I expected. We did like two hours, is it?
I don't know but we did a very thorough job. But I will. You know what? For next time, I'm just gonna collect the propaganda so that it's getting out. I mean, the propaganda is just getting outrageous. So just so that you can just like go through a lot of.
Yeah, maybe let's focus on, we can go into many different directions, but I think the most important topic right now is Ukraine. There's
Okay,
so much happening.
and there's
I
so
think
much
that
bad propaganda. So
sanctions, absolutely, absolutely. But I mean, uh, no matter what, whenever we talk about Ukraine, we need to go back to 2014. Just go back to the historical,
yeah. So
they
when the war began, 2014.
exactly, and then we can start. I mean, very soon with within 1 week, things are going. I mean, they're going to have some
Yeah, I mean
big
when
things happening.
I spoke to this former Indian ambassador, Mr. M. Badrakumar, and he was telling me this. Like, yeah, he said, well, when India did this in order to create, to end the genocide in Bangladesh, everyone in we were the pariah of the world. But within 3 months, everyone in the world recognized Bangladesh, and everything went back to normal. And that's what he said. So,
Yeah, it's good. No, but
he's right.
and actually, now that you mentioned India, I think it's very interesting the position of India right now. That is so
India's
interesting.
not abandoning Russia because it knows its allies.
It's non-aligned. In the 60s,
No,
actually,
it's not non. I mean, India refused. The non-aligned movement was a really good movement.
yeah.
But India's not abandoning Russia like everyone else.
Exactly. But I really think that India is kind of has been hostage all along. It's playing the same game as China used to do.
Yeah,
We are with you, but we're not really with you. It's
yeah.
pretending to be the bride, but it's not the bride. And actually, informally, it's counterintuitive, but I think informally, India is with the global south is actually kind of backing China. When the time comes, they
They
will
were,
side with China. When the
inshallah.
time comes,
I mean,
inshallah.
well, India's hard to explain because it's a well, India's another but let's say, yeah, like I said, inshallah. With that, everyone have a very good day, and I will next time I get Angelo, I'll collect all the propaganda so we can go propaganda, and we'll have
Sounds
Janet
good.
on. Okay.
Okay,
With
good to
that,
talk to you.
Sloboda narodu i smrti fascismu. That's our greeting.
Okay, bye bye, Esha.